Good morning, everybody. We're about to begin. I'm Liz Gamache, Director of Efficiency Vermont, and on behalf of the Efficiency Vermont team, along with our fellow energy efficiency utilities, Burlington Electric Department and Vermont Gas Systems, it is my pleasure to welcome each and every one of you here today for the Better Buildings by Design Conference. I'd like to give some special thanks to our keynote speaker, Ann Edminster, for traveling all the way to Vermont to be with us, and to the more than 1,000 attendees, workshop presenters, moderators, and exhibitors who are all working over the next couple of days to learn and to share information and experiences with one another, and also to the so very many folks who have been working over the last several months to make this conference possible. Before we begin, I'll just share with you a little bit about what to expect in this session. I'd like to share some opening remarks with you. We've got some awards and special recognition that will follow that. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping updates, and then we'll be delighted to hear from our keynote speaker, Ann. As I said, am so pleased to be here with all of you who contribute to the strength and vitality of the clean energy economy in Vermont. This is my third year attending the conference, and I think this year it's perhaps more important than ever for us to come together as partners in this industry. With new leadership in the country and the state, we're anticipating and preparing for a year of change. This change certainly comes with uncertainties, but I think there are fortunately some important things that will hold steady. The first is that Vermont continues to have strong leadership that acknowledges climate change as a real issue and that seeks to address it by supporting our state's energy goals to advance a clean energy future. I'm grateful for this, and I thank our congressional delegation along with our state elected officials for their ongoing commitment. The second thing I'd like to note is that energy efficiency is a common sense solution. It's not up for debate. It's something that everyone can get behind. It's unifying, because it's hard to argue that no matter where our energy is coming from, we should always try to use less. And when we improve our building envelopes and upgrade our building systems, not only do we save money, we enhance comfort, we boost indoor air quality, and we make for healthier and more productive environments. In Vermont, energy efficiency accounts for more than 14% of the state's electric load. It's integral to our grid. It increases stability and reliability of our power supply, and it's a cost-effective investment. For every dollar put forward toward efficiency, there's a $2 return. At Efficiency Vermont, we aim to continue delivering on that investment. Our goal is to provide all Vermonters with sustainable energy solutions. And to do that, we have three major focus areas that I'd like to talk about today: housing affordability, economic growth and development, and environmental protection. Sustainable energy, and in particular energy efficiency, is all about health and affordability. Energy costs are a major expense for Vermonters, particularly low-income Vermonters. And the availability of affordable, low-cost housing in our state needs to increase. This is why we're partnering with developers, contractors, and property owners to work towards increasing that availability. In 2016, we provided support to a number of exciting new affordable housing projects throughout the state. I'd like to share a couple of those with you. In Waltham, the McKnight Lane project, an abandoned mobile home park, was transformed into a net zero modular home park. Developed by the Addison County Community Trust in partnership with Cathedral Square Corporation and built by Vermont, this is a 14-home development that brings together energy efficiency, renewable generation, storage that came with the support of Green Mountain Power to create a stable stock of long-term affordable housing. In Milton, Elm Place, the first passive house multifamily building for low-income senior citizens, was developed by Cathedral Square. This project demonstrated that the highest level of energy efficiency isn't just for those with greater means. Not only is this project providing low-cost housing to a fixed-income population, it is also serving as a healthy and comfortable living environment. Now, these are just a couple of examples of how local organizations, developers, and utilities are working collaboratively to make a huge impact on the lives of Vermonters. And with more projects in the works this year, that impact can and will continue to grow. Energy efficiency also serves as a very important economic driver in our state. Just looking around this room, it's so evident to see how widespread the industry's reach is. Vermont's 2016 Clean Energy Industry Report states that over 17,000 workers, that's 1 in 17, that's 6%, work in energy efficiency, renewable energy, clean transportation, or a related support service industry. Businesses can reap so many benefits from saving energy, ranging from a healthier bottom line, to a more comfortable and safe workforce, to improved operations and productivity. I recently visited Vermont's leading and oldest producer of customized granite memorials, Adams North Barry Granite, of course in Barry, Vermont. And this is just one example of the thousands of businesses that we work with, but it's a great illustration of how energy efficiency can help to foster the needs of a particular industry. Now, as many of you know, the granite industry has been central to the state's economy for more than 140 years. But unfortunately, in recent times, it's not thriving quite as much as it once did. Fewer people are seeking local granite, and imported materials have driven down the market price. These realities underscore the importance of keeping manufacturing costs as low as possible. Efficiency Vermont has been so pleased to work and understand the needs of Adams North Barry Granite consistently over the years since 2003, and we've helped to upgrade their HVAC systems, install an advanced filtration system with heat recovery, and upgrade the lighting, just to name a few examples. Looking at the combination of all this tremendous energy efficiency work that they have undertaken, Adams North Barry is estimated to save more than $500,000 in energy costs over the lifetime of the measures they've implemented. And they'll do that on average with a 2.5-year payback. Now, this is just one story of thousands of how Vermont businesses are working hard and taking a leadership role to improve not only their work conditions and operations, but to reduce their costs through energy efficiency. I see tremendous potential for our state's industries to grow and thrive, and I believe that efficiency will continue to be an important part of this. I'm excited to continue our work supporting this momentum in 2017. Now, all of these achievements, all of this progress in the field of energy efficiency has also, of course, impacted our environment in a positive way. As we incorporate more energy efficiency into our homes, businesses, institutions, and communities, we've become more equipped to meet the remaining energy needs that will come as we implement renewable energy sources. Our work at the local level, the work that each of you is doing every day, has a far greater impact than I think we sometimes may realize. What we do here in Vermont positions us as a leader. It provides a roadmap for others to follow. And as we continue to partner, collaborate, and innovate, the more stable and sustainable our future will be for the next generation in this state and this country. So it's with that in mind that I'd like to thank each and every one of you for the important work that you all do, for being a valued partner to Efficiency Vermont, and for taking the time today and tomorrow to learn and share with one another at the Better Buildings by Design Conference. With that, I'd like to move on to some special recognitions. In a moment, we'll talk about some special awards. But first, I'd like to welcome Beth Sachs, co-founder of Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, which operates Efficiency Vermont. And she would like to honor two longtime champions of the energy efficiency industry. And I'll just add that Beth is our inspiration, and it's just an honor for us to work with her each and every day. Here's Beth.
Back at ya. Thank you, Liz, for this opportunity to celebrate two people of national renown who have dedicated their lives to the essential work that we do. And we're Q-tips, which is what some friends of mine call people with white hair, and that's why we're just so glad to see so many young people here, because the work we're doing is more important than ever. So first, I'd like to welcome and honor Henri DeMarin and ask him to come up and join me. We're both moving pretty slow, so I'll start. Henri has attended every one of these conferences from the very first one up until last year, when he was unfortunately too sick to come. He's back, he says, one last time, but maybe we'll see about that. You never know. We could see you here back next year. And he's here so that we can thank him for his devotion to building science and for making it accessible to the public. He created a newspaper column in 1974 called About the House in Washington, D.C., in a national paper there. And it became nationally syndicated and was carried in 100 newspapers in the United States and Canada. While national syndication of it ended last year because it was the casualty of the print media, he still is producing it in Vermont at the Burlington Free Press, and so we're still fortunate enough to be able to read it here in Vermont. It's now published under Henri's own name, which is About the House. Over all these years, Henri has and will continue to make building science understandable to the average person looking for straightforward answers to issues about their homes, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I feel like I've spent about 40 years working on it, and it's an incredible talent. He's always open, accessible, and eager to keep learning and teaching and help people solve problems. He's been a fierce advocate of energy efficiency, VEIC, and Efficiency Vermont as long as I've known him, and we go back quite a ways. So please join me in thanking Henri for his many years of contribution to building science.
Thank you very much, Beth, and I'm very honored and humbled by this recognition, and I want to say that I didn't prepare any notes because I didn't expect to say anything, but I've been in the construction business for 60 years and learned a lot through experience, and when I learned about Efficiency Vermont and VEIC. I attended every one of their conferences, and the knowledge that I've acquired has been extraordinary. There are several people here with whom I had regular contacts to continue learning because they are on the cutting edge of science. We're very fortunate to have this organization, VEIC, started by two Vermont visionaries, Blair Hamilton and Beth Sachs, that have given us such an opportunity to increase our knowledge of the construction business, of the energy efficiency, and so on. And I'm very thankful for their being here and for having started something in Vermont which is now nationally recognized. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Henri. They gave me a few minutes, so I'll talk really fast. I'd like to also take a few minutes to acknowledge and honor another giant in the field of energy efficiency, Art Rosenfeld. I don't know how many people of you have heard of him, but he's reverently known as the father, the godfather or whatever of energy efficiency, and he died last week. He was a nuclear physicist who, during the oil embargo in 1973, he was working at Lawrence Berkeley Labs in California, and he decided to turn off all the lights, which no one bothered to do because energy was too cheap to worry about. So he turned off all the lights, and he calculated the savings from doing that. And from that action, the technical and philosophical underpinnings of energy efficiency were born. He dedicated the rest of his life to this mission, winning a staggering number of awards around the world for his work. His research led to great improvements in energy efficiency products when energy efficiency wasn't even considered as an aspect of an appliance. He went on to champion appliance standards, building codes, and new building materials. Art, like Henri, has inspired multitudes of energy researchers and scientists and doers, like all of us here. Among them, Blair Hamilton and I, who had the honor to work with him, with this truly brilliant, inquisitive, generous, and kind man in California in the early 70s, developing low emissivity window technologies that are now a standard in the energy efficient housing building arena. A group of international scientists recognizing his value, and this was before he died, proposed a new measurement in Art's name called the Rosenfeld, which is 3 billion kilowatt hours of annual electricity savings, equivalent to the amount needed to needed to eliminate the need for an average coal plant. So that's a Rosenfeld, if you ever hear that. Art, thank you. And Henri, we wouldn't be here without your passionate dedication to energy science, your wisdom to use it to create policy, and for sharing your work with the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Henri, for your dedication, your contributions, and your inspiration. Now, we have a few Best of the Best awards to announce. What I'll do is ask you to hold your applause until the end of the awards presentation. We'll ask all the award winners to stand up and be recognized at that point. The Best of the Best. The first category is Commercial Building Design and Construction. And the award for Large Building Honor Award goes to Weeman Lamphere Architects for the Vermont Public Radio addition and renovation in Colchester. Next up, the Small Building Honor Award goes to Breadloaf Corporation for the Middlebury Town Offices. A Small Building Merit Award goes to Black River Design Architects, and this is for the Community Transit Center in Middlebury. A Major Renovation Honor Award to Smith Alvarez Sinkowitz Architects for 3 South Street in Middlebury, Vermont. Whoops. There we go. Multi-Family New Construction Honor Award to Scott and Partners Incorporated for the Downstreet Apartments in Barre, Vermont. I think I got out of order. If I can go back to the Small Building Merit Award, goes to McClay Architects, and that's for the Suncommon headquarters in Waterbury, Vermont. Sorry about that. Moving on to the Multifamily Major Renovation Honor Award to Scott and Partners Incorporated for the Darling Inn Apartments in Lyndonville, Vermont. Next category is Home Performance with Energy Star. The first honor award goes for a project under $10,000. That goes to Kitchenland, and this is for the Russa home in Barnet, Vermont. A merit award for a project under $10,000 goes to Energy Smart of Vermont, and this is for the James home in East Barre, Vermont. Now we have an honor award for a project over $10,000. This goes to Three Tree Home Performance. It's for the Morgan home in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. A merit award for a project over $10,000 to New Frameworks Natural Design Build, and this is for the Weinstock home in South Burlington. Our next category is residential new construction. We're pleased to deliver an honor award to Kinsey Construction for the Pitkin home in Wolcott, Vermont, and a merit award to Vermont Homes. And this is for the McLaughlin home in Woodstock, Vermont. An affordable energy efficient construction honor award goes to Vermont Homes, and this is for the energy efficient modular home in Waltham, Vermont. Homes, plural. Affordable energy efficient construction merit award to Thibodeau Construction for the Gunnet home in Huntington, Vermont. And now, last but not least, our partners of the year. For residential new construction partner of the year, we honor Shepherd Custom Homes. And for commercial new construction partner of the year, we're pleased to honor Jim Secor and the Secor Group. Congratulations to all of you. I'd ask you to stand up while we applaud you for your great accomplishments. Thank you. Okay, we're almost to our wonderful keynote address. A couple of housekeeping items before we get there. First, for those of you who use Twitter, we encourage you to use hashtag BBD17. That's BBD17. With regard to your name tags, be sure to get them scanned at the end of each session for continuing education credits. For those of you who just received Best of the Best awards, we would like to have an opportunity to take your photos immediately after the keynote address. When you exit, look for Bob Murphy, who's in the back waving. He will guide you to the proper location. Presentations will all be posted online by the end of the week. You can find them at the efficiencyvermont.com website. It's efficiencyvermont.com/conference. This is really important. Coffee will be served in the exhibitor hall following the keynote. And finally, for the second year, the BBD conference is available on the Guidebook app. So if you'd like to follow it, download the app on your phone, and then you can search for BBD 2017. Please join me in warmly welcoming Anne today.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, and thank you for the warm welcome. And I'm really honored to be here in the far corner of the country from where I live in California. And I hope you won't poke too much fun at me because we are weather wimps. We acknowledge this. So I'm deliberately not talking to you about anything weather related, avoiding the hard topics. Instead, I'm going to be focusing on more the picture, I'd say nationally, to a certain extent continentally, and to a very minor extent internationally with zero net energy. So you see my kind of goofy image here, the Cinderella of energy efficiency. I was at the ACEEE summer study on buildings this past August, surrounded by probably many of you. How many were there at ACEEE summer study? You got a handful, not huge. If you don't go next year. It's really a fabulous conference, but populated by people who have been doing energy efficiency for, in many cases, a very long time. And I thought, wow, these are my people. And indeed they are. However, it was also interesting to me how energy efficiency and zero energy, which in my mind are virtually identical twins, were not perceived that way for much of the energy efficiency community, hence the Cinderella of energy efficiency. So sort of the lowlier on the totem pole, not so much recognized in the past, but Cinderella is coming into her own. And I'll talk to you a little bit about why, and perhaps why that is a good thing and something that the energy efficiency community, more broadly speaking, might embrace with some enthusiasm. So first of all, a zero energy timeline. And it's always fun to look at graphs that start out really tiny and then go swooping up into the atmosphere. I did a talk at UVM yesterday. By the way, if you were there, I'm covering very much the same territory. I will not be offended if you get up and go get a cup of coffee. Okay, so the percent growth in zero energy has been pretty dramatic over the last decade plus. The numbers are, in comparison to the industry as a whole, are still very, very small. But I think growth is important because when we start to see things double, you guys all know the effect of compound interest. Most of you probably have mortgages and have had cause to rue the effect of compound mortgage. Well, that's all about percentage growth over time. So the bright side of that is we are growing this industry and it is starting to pick up some steam. So a few landmarks along the way. You'll notice, I don't think I have a pointer on here. Do I? That's this little one. Okay, so, but you know, it doesn't do me much good from here, so I'll just gesture wildly. Cinderella's humble beginnings on, let's see, that would be, it's my left, and so it's your left too. I'm looking at a screen down here, so it was funny because I was at a presentation a few days ago where someone said, and on the right, and I was thinking, no, that's your right, but it's not our right. But I don't have to be confused here. So not much going on around the turn of the century with zero net energy. It was a pretty sleepy little thing going on. Come the middle of 2006, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory published its first major paper on this, Zero Energy Buildings, a Critical Look at the Definitions, where they laid out these 4 definitions: zero net site energy, zero net source energy, zero net energy cost, zero net energy emissions. And by the way, I read that paper about 7 times, and it took me a really long time to wrap my head around the difference of all those definitions. We won't go there today. I will spare you that excruciating agony and the steps that it took me to understand what it really meant. Not so important in this conversation today, but it is definitely one of the complexities that we deal with in this environment. A couple years, really actually only a year after that, the California Public Utilities Commission announced its big, bold energy goals, 2 of which were that all new construction, new residential construction in the state of California should be zero net energy by 2020, and that all new non-residential construction should follow in those zero energy footsteps by 2030. So back in 2006, that sounded kind of far away. The intervening 11 years have flown, and now all of a sudden 2020 is right there on the horizon, and most people who are working on building projects recognize that, wow, 2017 to 2020, that's pretty much our development cycle. So we are really looking at that deadline. The industry in California is starting to look at that in a very, very different way. It used to be a little bit like, really? What is that anyway? And why worry about it? Now it's more like, okay, tell us more. They're a little nervous, but starting to capture their attention. 2 years later, I wrote Energy Free, Homes for a Small Planet, which was the first book about zero energy design and construction and focused on homes, as the title suggests. And I like to think that this slight uptick had something to do with me, but I think that's probably a little bit optimistic. Either my crystal ball was very good, or I'm much more powerful than I think I am. I'm going with the crystal ball. At any rate, it's been very exciting to see that indeed zero net energy has become a major interest in the energy field and is starting to really capture the public imagination. And we are starting to see the growth of this field climb. In 2013, I had the great privilege, and I sympathize with all the conference organizers here today, of helping put together the first Net Zero North American Leadership Summit, where we brought together, under the auspices of the Net Zero Energy Coalition, almost 200 leaders in zero energy and allied fields for the first sort of cross-stakeholder organization dialogue about what was happening with zero energy and how we could make it all happen quite a bit faster. 2 years later, we held our second summit. That was in March 2015. We held in conjunction with the NESI conference, once again brought together the similar number of folks to continue that dialogue. How do we work together to make these changes that we all want to see happen faster? And right around that same time, Bill McClay published his book, first major publication to focus on non-residential zero energy, and a tremendous addition to the field. So we're starting to see little bits of progress. And then not too terribly long ago, we have a new paper from NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, with a common definition for zero energy buildings. So instead of 4, we're trying to narrow down to 1 and have more consensus around that. And that's a source-based definition. Again, I'm not going to digress too far there. But we're definitely starting to see things pick up. It's like, all right, there's a lot of zero energy activity right now and a lot of confusion about definitions. So we're trying to coalesce folks around a common definition. So that, I think, is a real indicator of the fact that this is something to pay attention to. Briefly on terminology, net zero energy, zero net energy, people are still asking me, well, which one is it? Doesn't matter. In fact, for the most part, those of us who are really pushing on this are trying to drop the net. The thought being that if you're in the sphere of geekdom, you probably know what the net means and you don't need it. If you hear zero energy, you know we mean net. And if you're outside that circle, the whole zero energy thing is a big question mark anyway, and the net doesn't actually help clarify anything. So we're trying to pare this down and make it a little more accessible. Tomato, tomato, ZNE, NZE, NZE, if you're Canadian. So we'll try to be universal. Okay, and I'm guessing that there's a quite high level of sophistication in this room, and maybe I don't need to do the real basics, but every time I skip them, somebody comes up to me afterwards and said, so what exactly is zero net energy? So I'm going to spend just maybe a minute or so on that. Very simple terms, we're talking about playing with the variables we have available to us in building energy, one being reduction of energy use through efficiency strategies, the other being production of renewable energy on site, ideally trying to push from both ends so that the net effect at the end of the year is zero. So there's some overproduction at part of the year and certain times a day, underproduction at other times, and the excess that's sent to the grid when it's not needed is taken back when it is. So again, we're zeroing out when we look at the energy use on an annual basis. Nothing exotic. Similarly, there's nothing exotic in the basic strategies that get us to zero net energy. These things are all going to be quite familiar to you, I suspect. Efficient form and orientation. This is a basic. How many architects do we have in the room? Bunches. Okay, that's great. So probably somewhere along your way in your architecture education, somebody talked to you about form and orientation. If they didn't, well, they should be flogged. And let's hope they did, and you've making up any deficit along the way. Interesting part of the story is, as basic as efficient form and orientation are, these are some of the most frequently forgotten tools in the designer's toolkit. So it's important to mention them. And I'll probably rant a little bit more about that in a bit because it pops up again in my presentation. High performance enclosure, we've seen a lot of emphasis on that, and we have the passive house community to thank for really moving us all along, I think, tremendously in our understanding and ability to apply principles of efficient enclosures over the last, let's say, decade or so. So we're coming along there. Right-sized and efficient mechanical systems, heating, cooling, hot water, ventilation, these are all very important. Again, not exotic, not surprising. Best-in-class plug loads. So, and I say best in class as opposed to, say, Energy Star, because Energy Star is by no means the be-all, end-all. It's a great bottom, a floor for performance, if you will, but there are tiers of performance above Energy Star. So anything that plugs in, uses electricity, we're really looking to the best options that are available to us that will perform the necessary tasks. And when all of these things are balanced, reducing energy use as much as possible, then and only then do we add renewable energy to achieve the zero goal. Again, nothing really exotic. Moving slightly into the, if not exotic, a bit less common in zero energy projects, performance dashboards. There's a growing understanding that buildings in and of themselves don't actually use energy. It's the people in those buildings who use energy. So we need to somehow have a better relationship with those people and their energy use. And controlling people, as you probably all know, is a challenging exercise. Many of you probably have children, I do, and it's phenomenal how little control one truly has over one's children, let alone adults with more self-will and autonomy. So it's no wonder that we are challenged in getting people to operate their buildings the way we would like them to. So performance dashboards are an important tool, not only helping us understand better what's going on in buildings, understanding where interventions may be appropriate, but also making the impacts of operation and sort of our living behaviors transparent to the occupants of the buildings and giving them some actionable outcomes that they can act upon to say, okay, let's see what happened. We had an energy spike here. What's going on? Is something on that shouldn't be on? Are we just not paying attention to something that's running that doesn't need to be? There are all kinds of opportunities that are presented with the use of energy dashboards. Then, of course, electric vehicles are coming along. And so a lot of homes, especially zero energy, we have our early adopter communities who are really interested in diminishing all parts of their energy footprint and moving towards hybrid and electric vehicles. So that starts to change the equation a little bit. When we talk about home energy, we used to be thinking about really just what's happening inside the home, but as the occupants of the home, we have an opportunity to think more broadly about our footprint as people on the planet, and that includes our transportation use. It includes also other things like our food use and our vacations and so forth, purchases of durable goods. But with the zero energy equation expanding, transportation, I think, is the first thing that's kind of being brought under this larger umbrella. And along with that, battery storage is coming along as well. So what we want in terms of a zero energy project starts to shift as we move this boundary of the variables we're considering. So if it's just energy in the house, that's one thing. If we're adding the electric vehicle, then we have to think about it a little differently. If we want battery storage, think about it a little bit differently still. And that also, of course, has implications for the relationship with the utilities and the effects on the grid. So it gets more and more complicated the more of these elements we wrap in. Not to make it sound too daunting, but challenging. Okay, so that's kind of the basic picture of the basic picture, not to be redundant. Okay, so where's the movement headed? I'm going to do a little bit of charting of where we've come from and where we seem to be headed. So first of all, this is a global movement. And I did a bit of research several years ago when I was speaking at Intersolar, because that's an international conference. And I thought, well, really, how widespread is this? And I found zero energy projects on virtually every continent. I think maybe not the Arctic. But every place else, I found some zero energy projects or projects attempting to reach zero energy. I also found that there are projects happening at community scale. And in fact, when I was first asked to sit on a zero energy advisory committee or task force for our local utility in the Bay Area, most of the folks in the room said, why are we even bothering with zero energy buildings when we know that we need to achieve zero energy at community scale? I think the reason is we're never going to figure out how to do that if we can't figure out how to do the buildings first. But there are folks who are already taking that next leap, which is very exciting and definitely poses some fascinating questions. In terms of who's moving along the agenda in the United States, there are many, many regional organizations such as your own who are making inroads at the regional level. Those who are operating more on a national scale or international scale are listed here. And I could probably double this slide if I started digging a little bit, but these are the ones who are most active in the dialogue, working with one another towards zero energy aims. As you can see, they fall in certain categories. So the picture I'm going to present of our movement really comes primarily from these two in the middle that I've highlighted in red, the Net Zero Energy Coalition, which focuses primarily on the picture for residential zero energy, and New Buildings Institute, which focuses primarily on the picture for non-residential. So we'll start with the residential. We did our first inventory in 2015 and published the results of that inventory last January. So at that time, as you can see, we had identified 407 projects comprising over 3,000 buildings and over 6,000 individual residential units. So this is a combination, clearly, of single-family and multifamily projects, and some of the multifamily projects are, well, this is where terminology gets a little confusing. There were single-family projects of multiple units, and there are multifamily buildings that have multiple units, obviously, within the buildings. So this is all those together. A couple of interesting things that came out from that study were almost a 50-50 split. You can see on the lower right where I've circled the number of single-family versus multifamily units. So I think it really surprised a lot of people that the split was this even. And what's happening there is that there are a few multifamily developers who have really jumped on the bandwagon and embraced zero energy, and they've been helped out by things like USDA grants that are given bonuses. So in the scoring system, there is a bonus given in competing for those awards for zero energy projects. And so we have a consulting firm in Northern California, a sleepy little town with a very lively zero energy practice, Redwood Energy, and they've sort of put this equation together where they've managed to find clients in California who understand that they're up against the state goals, and they have the USDA incentives for zero energy. They also get bonuses for achieving LEED certification, Energy Star, and so they're piling it all on and developing quite a bit of momentum. So you'll also see the little colored dots that show some concentrations. So in terms of overall projects, so these are project numbers, not unit numbers, projects, Northeast wins hands down. You guys are definitely out in front on this one. California, we have fewer dots, but more units, actually, because those are, by and large, multifamily projects. So now, you guys are only my second audience to see preliminary numbers from our 2016 survey. These numbers will probably shift a little bit before we publish, because we're still pulling in some stragglers. But we have seen significant growth, depending on which parameters you look at. We're maybe half again last year. Buildings aren't growing as much, but this again is because the growth is concentrated in the multifamily projects. So the growth in multifamily units is the biggest of all. That number is doubled, more than doubled. So very, very interesting. So what we're seeing is that the early adopters, again, you folks in the Northeast really represent the early adopter audience, or that's not quite right. population, zero energy population of early adopters, probably more than any other part of the country. And most of the work that's been done is in single-family homes. And in fact, there are a number of my colleagues and I in California that I jokingly refer to as the Let's Try It at Home Club. And I'm sure there are quite a few of you in that group that let's try it at home. So some of these single-family homes were your very own homes. And after you figured out, yes, it can be done, you carried that out into your practices. So that's represented and a really important kickstart for the industry. The second wave are these affordable and multifamily zero energy homes. So we're starting to get scale, and there's been a big growth in the numbers from those. What isn't yet showing up as a significant statistic, but I think will be over the next couple of years, is this third wave of spec and production zero energy homes. Right now, the spec building community tends to be more conservative, more risk averse for good reasons. There's more at stake, and certainly the publicly traded builders have to answer to stockholders, and so they have to be very, very cautious in their financial moves. Nevertheless, we're seeing some indicators that they're going to start to pick up some steam, and we're going to see much more significant growth over the next couple of years. So my colleague Bruce Sullivan at the Zero Energy Project put together this list for a blog post just last week. And it's, I think, again, these are small numbers of builders, but some of them are quite large. So Meritage, KB Home, Pulte Group, those are very large builders. The rest of these are more smaller, more regional builders. But the fact that we're starting to see interest among both those groups is really quite significant. And I think that probably by this time next year, we're going to see these numbers maybe more than double. I would like to think maybe 4x or something. We'll see, but very exciting changes afoot. So far I've been talking about zero energy homes, kind of treating all of them in one big bucket. The reality is that there are several buckets, and not all of them are truly zero net energy. The zero energy ones represent about a quarter of the whole stock. The biggest chunk are a group that we refer to collectively as zero energy ready, and this represents in our inventory anything that doesn't yet have a year of operational data, anything that's maybe built to the Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Home Standard, but doesn't necessarily have solar, passive house projects which are designed to be able to be zero energy with the addition of solar. So anything that it maybe is in the ballpark but hasn't been able to produce operating data yet to substantiate their zero energy status goes into this largest category, zero energy ready. And then we've got our net producers, an impressive 15% of the projects showing up in the inventory. And then 1,000 Home Challenge, which is another very significant wedge of this. These are existing homes where through a combination of technical interventions, retrofits, and behavioral strategies, lifestyle choices, the owners are able to get their homes to what's called a deep energy reduction, somewhere in the 75% lower than a standard home that is comparable in other respects. And those are homes, some of the homes participating in the 1,000 Home Challenge also do achieve zero energy or even net positive. So the ones here in the red wedge are only the ones that are purely 1,000 Home Challenge, not also net producers or zero energy. So, and we don't consider them necessarily building projects, again, because these are using operating data, and in some cases there is a significant behavioral component to how those energy goals are being achieved. Okay, time for water. Then we'll move to the non-residential buildings. How am I doing on time? Is anybody paying attention to that? Okay. But you don't know how much more I have to say. Okay, great, thank you. All right, so the non-residential inventory has been conducted by the New Buildings Institute. They've been at it for quite a bit longer, so that very first graph I showed you with the various landmarks on it, that was produced by New Buildings Institute. And this is from their latest inventory they published in October 2016. And so it's a little bit different, but you also see that the blue states, oh, isn't that interesting? It's the blue states that have the most zero energy activity. I promise this was not going to be a political talk. That just slipped out. And then the green dots show the number of zero energy verified buildings. So they have a little bit different sorry, I can talk sometimes. Terminology, I'll get to that, the slide after this. One thing to point out, this represents a number of different building types. They do include some multifamily buildings. So this is an area where their inventory overlaps the coalition's inventory, and we're actually kind of working this year on trying to avoid that overlap so that we have a bit cleaner statistics. So the two organizations are working side by side. I work with both of them, so that'll be part of my job, is to try and square these things away a little bit more. In terms of the level of performance of their projects, also slightly different terminology, but similar breakdown. So Z&E verified, like our Z&E, have achieved zero energy as demonstrated through utility data for at least a year. Their Z&E emerging and ultra-low energy categories are both what would fall into our catch-all of zero net energy ready. So, and this slide shows the breakdown by both that level of performance and the different building sizes. So you can see that there's more ways to slice and dice when we get into the non-residential territory. This is perhaps one of the more helpful slides when we think about the growth trajectory. So this just looking at every 2 years of the last 3 inventories. I think 2012 is where they first really started officially collecting these numbers. And you can see this is a curve, and it is starting to climb, which is very encouraging. Also kind of interesting, in the fine print, you'll see in the legend, it says these are zero net energy projects, buildings and districts. So this is another thing that we'd like to tease out this coming year. It's like, well, which are buildings and which are districts? And sort of start to pull this apart more. Because the farther along we get in this, the more things start to differentiate and get more interesting, more fascinating. So these inventories and all the dialogue that goes along with them as we chase down partners to find out more about their projects, we find out more and more about what's happening among the world of zero energy practitioners. It'll be interesting to see for you how many of these things either do or don't resonate. So don't be shy in letting me know. First one, better controls. And this is an issue that was identified in this study, which I had a very minor role in, that was run by New Buildings Institute for CABA, which is the Continental Automated Buildings Association, and sponsored by several other organizations, where I think it was a couple of dozen of the zero energy commercial buildings were surveyed, talking to owners, operators, and design teams about the role of controls in the buildings. And the overwhelming finding was, yes, we have controls, but they're not all that great. They don't integrate all that well with our different systems. They don't really achieve quite the level of performance that we hoped they would. So this is an area where we really do need to see a bit more progress in the technology development to really facilitate the sort of optimum efficiency outcomes that we're looking for. So back to the drawing board. And by the way, one of the interesting things I observed when I was the Solar Decathlon juror in 2015 was, even in residential, so these are student-built, granted, and in many cases donated equipment. But that was, I would say, far and away the most obvious challenge faced when we walked through as jurors and the student teams had to show us their homes and demonstrate various features. And in fact, we did a night tour where the focus really was on lighting. And even in homes where it's generally quite a bit simpler than in commercial buildings, the lighting controls were problematic in, I'd say, 2/3 of the homes. And now we're going to show you how this dimming works. Well, let's tell you how it's supposed to work. So this is an area that definitely needs help. Low-load HVAC. This, unlike the last slide, which really focused on non-residential, this I work more in residential. I know it does tend to be an issue in non-res as well, but notably in California in particular, where we do tend to have less weather, so lower loads, getting a really tight, efficient house matched up with an appropriate HVAC system is really quite challenging. So this is, there's quite a lot of information crammed onto this slide, but some of the key takeaways, one of the demonstration projects that I've been working on for the last year or so is now occupied. We're starting to get some data, and I'll be talking about that project this afternoon. But one of the pieces about that was the load analysis showed that what we needed for that house was a half-ton unit. Well, we couldn't get a half-ton unit, so we have a 3/4-ton unit in that house. Now, you guys may laugh and think, oh, a half-ton would never meet our loads up here. But nevertheless, I've heard even from your comrades in the Northeast that getting that load balance can be quite tricky when we start to bring those loads down. And so the little table above, too, sort of gives them an indication. So this project is the one in the middle where the HVAC is sized to have each ton serve 1,600 square feet. The industry standard is double to triple that. So because we really, our industry, again, I will only speak for California, but the HVAC industry in California has no clue how to really address low loads. And we've got another demonstration project that is underway right now in a more severe climate in California where they're targeting 2,400 square feet to be conditioned for every ton. So this is definitely a need where we have technology still in the developmental stages. And then, of course, we are always looking for more efficient renewable energy. And by and large, our solutions for renewables on site are photovoltaics. So this is just an indication of where we're headed with photovoltaics. The yellow line across the middle represents where we are in efficiency with the SunPower module, which is, I believe it's the most efficient commercially available module right now. That's at 24.1% efficiency. But then you can see all of these different research cells and how they've been climbing out over time. So we now have a research cell that's almost double the efficiency of that SunPower cell. And if you look at the trends of this graph, I think you can only arrive at the conclusion that I did, which is that given a few more years, we're going to have solar cells that are in the 40% efficient range. So since they are out there in the research world right now. So very efficient, very exciting, and those are going to enable many more projects to achieve zero net energy when we get those cells online. So another issue that is starting to emerge in this world, you know, those of us in energy efficiency and zero energy, we're all about operating energy. But there's also this thing called embodied energy or embodied carbon. And for a long time, for decades really, the energy community has acknowledged this, but said, right, but it's really a lesser thing, right? It's a small fraction of the overall energy represented by a building over its lifespan. So we kind of don't worry about that so much. Well, more recently, I'd say over the last maybe 3-4 years, there have been a few voices in our community starting to say, you know, we haven't necessarily been thinking about that quite right. Because it's true that it's a relatively small fraction of the overall energy that building represents in its lifetime, energy and carbon. However, let's think about the time value of that energy. That embodied energy or embodied carbon happens when the building is built. So when we build a new building or we rebuild and have injections of new materials, labor, machinery, energy, and so forth, that's a front-end load on the energy of that building. Well, since we only have about a 20-year horizon for us to turn around this climate change machine, we actually need to be very attentive to that front-end embodied energy or embodied carbon load. And really what I think it means for us as a community is we need to build fewer new buildings. We need to find more ways of repurposing our existing building stock, and to do so in the way that uses materials in the least carbon intensive way possible. I have a particular passion right now for extending that message to say, and let's avoid high rises, because high rises get more energy intensive as they go up. So yes, we need greater density where there isn't sufficient density to support mass transit, because of course transit is a huge part of the energy equation. But there is a point beyond which we do not need to go. And when we do, we are increasing the carbon intensity because we are converting from wood structure to steel and concrete. We are increasing the relative size of the foundation. And by the way, for those of you not aware, cement, Portland cement production alone represents somewhere between 7 and 9% of all CO2 emissions globally. So foundations, concrete, very big deal. The bigger the buildings, the taller buildings, the more the foundation grows in proportion to the footprint. So, and then there are a whole host of other arguments, but that's another talk for another day. At any rate, just want to raise that issue and then talk briefly about how do we get our buildings to zero energy. I talked about the components of a zero energy building, but the get there piece is a little bit different. That's the process piece as opposed to the stuff piece. Here, once again, is the stuff, the main stuff. Again, nothing exotic. So if it's not exotic, why aren't all buildings zero energy? So in doing the research for the inventory and then some subsequent independent research, which I did for an ACEEE paper last summer, I gleaned a number of findings by surveying some of the more experienced practitioners in the zero energy community, both builders and design professionals. And particularly from the design professionals, I heard some of the things that I've already mentioned, which I'll just reiterate, that the choice of mechanical equipment is a major factor. So same old isn't going to cut it. Even if you've been doing efficient buildings, zero energy may force you into another class, another strategy. Water heating also. Electric water heating strategies are favored by zero energy developers, and in fact, there's a move in general for the zero energy community to say, really the inevitable end game here is 100% electric buildings. And so we would love to use electric water heating strategies. However, there are some obstacles. There are financial obstacles. There are utility rate structure obstacles. There are space constraints that often come into play. So we don't have solutions to all these things. I'm the messenger of the things that I gleaned from this research. And then enclosures, again, nothing really exotic, but the main message that was conveyed by the practitioners is we didn't actually get the perfect enclosure for a zero energy projects the first time around. We keep tinkering with those to get better and better details and more cost-effective ways of achieving the performance we want out of our enclosures. And then finally, aesthetics. You know, I think a lot of folks who've been working in this arena for a long time remember with some chagrin the period of passive solar where there were some amazing buildings produced that had phenomenal performance results, but they were not exactly going to win any beauty pageants. And so there's a recognition in this way that, well, we also have to build buildings that are appealing, that people are going to love and want to live in and not feel freakish by having in their communities. So there's more attention this time around to the aesthetics. From the designers, another key lesson is, not surprisingly, design actually does matter. So I've already mentioned I think the first point about learning over the process of several projects and the fact that collaboration is tremendously important to get the most out of performance. This is an interesting project. It is a zero energy project in Silicon Valley in California. And it was presented by a colleague of mine at a class a few months ago where each of us presented something, and she showed this project and talked about their efforts in their firm, Point Energy Innovations, to achieve zero energy with this project, and described two options, two pathways to achieve zero energy. The first of which was the building, as it is here shown, meeting a minimum code level of efficiency. It had an energy use intensity of 42 kBTU per square foot year and could achieve zero energy via community solar or renewable energy credits. The second means of achieving zero energy would have required achieving a 33% improvement in energy efficiency, at which point they would have been able then to achieve zero net energy with on-site photovoltaics, which sounds like a win, except that the photovoltaics added $13 million to capital cost and would have required them, to get 33% more efficient. Well, I imagine there are quite a few of you in the room who looked at this image much the way I did and thought, is that a zero energy building? It doesn't look like anything that's trying to be zero energy building. So this is a really interesting example where kind of I would say the aesthetics were given way too much priority over performance. So this was an example where the team wasn't really operating in an integrated fashion. There was more a design aesthetic that was dictated to them, handed down to them, and then they were told, you need to get to zero net energy with this aesthetic. Well, in my view, that's tying your hands. That's sort of saying, do your design, but first of all, we're going to throw away half the tools in your design toolkit. So you don't get to choose form, you don't get to choose orientation, you don't get to do anything sensible or reasonable with glazing. But still, you go get to zero energy. Not a challenge I would care to tackle. I like to have all the design tools in my toolkit available to me. Okay, so the builders, we learned a few things from them too. A lot of this had to do with trades, integration of different trades, who's on your team, good coordination among the trades. So there's a lot of experience saying the way things normally play out on a construction project aren't really optimized for a zero energy outcome. So we need more active quality management processes. We need to be using diagnostics on site to look at how performance is unfolding as the building is being created. So it's a much more watchful eye over the process. And then from both the designers and builders, we heard about this constant theme of experimentation and iteration across multiple projects and about collaboration. So the builders want to be able to have a voice during design. Designers often need to be brought in for problem solving during construction. There's really a rather artificial divide between design and construction because constructability has to be factored in from the very beginning. And again, design is not really ever finished until the project is built and occupied. And there are also a lot of other aspects of collaboration that involve various other parties, from your local building officials to whoever is financing the project, developing it, and any number of other parties. Actually, I have a wonderful slide. I didn't include it, but a colleague in Nova Scotia did a very impressive diagram that maps all of the parties who have an influence on the building and its outcome. And it's huge. It's huge. Must have, I don't know, 30, 40 bubbles on it. So the final thing is virtually everybody we talked to mentioned training. So in other words, the skills and knowledge that our building professionals come into a project with are not necessarily sufficient to achieve the zero energy outcome. So we need to be prepared to do some education, to do some training to anyone we bring into zero energy projects. And I think probably the most important, thank you, the most important thing about the how we get there is this isn't so much about technology, it's about mindset. And how many of you guys know Bill Reed? Quite a few. Well, Bill Reed gave me a wonderful tool many years ago. He translated Donella Meadows' seminal paper about places to intervene in a system, which I think there were 12 or 16, there were different versions of the paper, into 4, because I can't remember 12 or 16, I can remember 4. And what Bill says, the most powerful tool for change is mindset. The second most powerful tool is process, followed by tools, and technology is at the bottom of the pyramid. So we're working with the most powerful tool when we talk about mindset. And the example I give here I think is tremendously important. I realized as I was working on my book back in 2009 that virtually all of the studies that were looking at zero net energy started by asking the question, how much more does it cost to do a zero energy building? When you ask that question, the answer inevitably is it costs X more. And I am thoroughly convinced, and I've discovered very happily over the last few years, I'm not alone, that that's not really how it works. The question we should be asking is, given our budget and our goals, what might we need to do differently in order to achieve zero net energy with the available budget? Very different answer. And I think the example I showed of the kind of funny figure 8 building is a great illustration of the wrong question, if you will. And I think a lot of our successful zero energy projects, many of them here in the Northeast, are examples of the right question, the what do we need to do differently in order to achieve zero energy on budget. So I'd like to really see us shift that mindset and start asking this question, what do we need to do differently? Another part of the do differently and the mindset is, I think that, another challenge that comes up in many conversations, whether it's about more energy efficient buildings or zero energy in particular, relates to the cost or the value. It's like, but we can't sell it for more. And I realized at a certain point that we're still talking about homes as though they're interchangeable with homes of the past. But a zero energy home is more than a home of the past. It's a home that has a built-in energy production capability. It's a mini utility tacked on. So you can go into your local Subaru dealership and you can buy a car, or you can buy a car with a really spiff roof rack. Maybe you can go next door and buy a teardrop trailer to tow along behind it. Well, those are significant value adds to the basic product. Zero energy capability in a home is a significant value add to a product. And we need to be communicating that more successfully. So my diagram here is not most clever graphically, but I'm trying to start to seed this message. And I encourage all the creative minds here to think likewise. How do we think differently about this? One builder, Gene Myers, who's with Thrive Home Builders in the Denver area, has really honed this to a fine art in his market. Gene's got 7 building lines, homes, 9 lines, 7 of which now are zero net energy. And he says, it's really simple. I ask customers to give me $100 more a month, and I will give them $300 back in utility savings. I think, yeah, that's pretty hard to argue with. And he's been 100% successful. In fact, he said earlier on, he started with zero energy ready homes and found that people didn't necessarily often upgrade to the zero energy model. Once he just switched and went to zero energy, they all sold. So there's an interesting, another mindset piece. It's like, well, sure, I can buy a house and eventually I'll build the gazebo or do the vegetable garden or whatever, but there's nothing like having it all there when you buy it and not having to add on to it later. So I think Gene's success is really inspiring. Another part of how we get there, this is mindset and process, is through an integrated process. It's hard to imagine that we could get a well-integrated product if we don't have a well-integrated team and process for production of that product. So this, I believe, is really critical, and again, involves all of the players. And, you know, I say, really, we're going to include the general contractor from day one. And there's so many arguments about, well, why we can't do that. You can do it. It may pose some challenges in certain contexts. But again, if you want the benefit of the wisdom about how it is done, how we get this thing from idea stage to built, then you really need the input of the general and some of the key trades as you start the design. Hard to optimize otherwise. And I believe that it's a simple genetics problem. So if you want a zero energy offspring, both parents, and it's a recessive gene, then both parents have to carry that recessive gene too. So you need zero energy on the architect parent side and zero energy on the construction side, or you're not going to get your zero energy baby, right? This my little goofy egg, I call it the golden goose egg. You know, some of you are probably too young to know, but goose egg means zero. So silliness. So again, how you get there, it's all the right people. It's not just their disciplines, it's their mindset. So these are the key attributes of mindset that I've identified through the years working in this field. How we get high performance projects is with people who are committed to the goal, who have a lot of creativity, they're willing to think outside the box. As we say, they have some experience and a spirit of engagement. And none of these is really optional. I did a poll when I did a talk yesterday. It's fun to do that, but we probably don't have time today. Nobody ever wants to give up any of these traits, but you have to give up one. Usually experience is the one that people will give up. Nobody will give up commitment, can't give up creativity, can't give up the spirit of engagement. But experience doesn't necessarily have to be held by everyone on the team, so long as there's some good, solid experience among the team. Very crucial. Okay, so why integrated design and delivery work? This is a nifty little graph, and it comes from this small print integrated design and delivery guide. This is a product. I've given you guys the URL because I really want everybody to go get this. It was developed by the Trinational Commission for Environmental Cooperation, a little-known agency that was created as part of the NAFTA process. So it is run by the US, Canadian, and Mexican governments pursuing issues of mutual interest under an environmental umbrella. And I had the great privilege of chairing Green Building Task Force for that commission for 5 years. And our final product under my leadership was production of this guide in 3 languages. And it spells out sort of the roles and process for all the different players who can engage in an integrated process. And then what can happen is what you do in this community can percolate up to state scale, and then what happens at the state level will then come back down and start to influence what's happening in other communities. So there's a really interesting reinforcing cycle going on with policy. So really, really worthwhile being involved in the local efforts. These are a bunch of other cities that are also pursuing low carbon and zero energy initiatives and learning from one another via the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. Those cities all came together last March. I was a part of the facilitation team at this event hosted by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund in New York, where the cities came together and mutually developed a roadmap for getting their cities to carbon neutrality by 2050. Incredibly exciting. One of the outgrowths of that meeting was a project that's being spearheaded by Rocky Mountain Institute called Realize, which is looking at deep energy reductions towards zero energy, and there will be pilots happening starting this year in San Francisco, New York City, and Vancouver, BC. So pretty cool stuff. And so these are all models that can be replicated and picked up. I like to quote my friend Dennis Creech, who used to say in his lovely Southern drawl that don't reinvent, use case studies, y'all. That's copy and steal everything. So copy and steal everything. Go forth and create zero energy communities. Thank you very much.